Reads, 7th annual Tupelo Reads program next month. Our book, as many of you know since we announced it in May for summer reading and for book clubs, is Dispatches from Pluto by Richard Grant. We've had a lot of, in fact, probably we've sold more copies of this book than any of the first 6 we've had of the Tupelo Reads programs this summer. So I'm excited. I know a lot of people are reading it or have read it by now and are looking forward to Richard coming. As usual, we're going to have a party, kind of a celebration that week too. This will be Tuesday. The party will be at the Ice House. It'll be called Singing the Blues. We've got a great blues singer, Effie Burt from Oxford, and her band. Alfonso is coming back, our saxophonist, and that's going to be Tuesday night. If you want a ticket to those, there are 130 places. We've already sold 100 without advertising it to the public, just from people who've been before. Let me know today, and I'll make sure you get one of those. They're $35. I think it's the cheapest fundraiser in Tupelo, $35.
But it was last year that thing at Rome, so they'll know if they win. That's the reason I thought I didn't go.
Thank you. Last year it was at Romy's. This year it's at the Ice House. It does move. We move around depending on the venue. But so if you went last year, it was Stuart Stevens' book. Rick Cleveland spoke on it. That was at Romy's. This year it's at the Ice House. It's Dispatches from Pluto Tuesday night. Then on Wednesday, Richard's going, as per usual, he's going out to Tupelo High School to speak to the English classes that morning, and then he will come here to the library at 11:30 for the September Luncheon with Books, which will be downstairs, and you'll get a chance to hear him, and we look forward to him coming. He and Steve have become friends, and that says a lot about both of them, I think. So look forward to seeing you all next month at the Tupelo Reads program, and Babe, Jeff, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jack, and I want to thank Lisa, who has really been so instrumental also in the Tupelo Reads program. It's a wonderful, wonderful event, and I look forward to it every year. Thank you for what you do, Jack and Lisa. At this time, I will ask Steve Holland to introduce our guest for us, and I'm sure he'll have just a few words to say.
A few words, yes. To follow up on Jack, now look, this Richard Grant's a real genuine piece of work if y'all hadn't met him. And he's fallen absolutely in love with the state of Mississippi, and that's easy to do for those of us that were born here. We know that. But y'all come, because it's going to be a real treat. Like the old Mississippi Alabama Fair and Dairy Show, this is going to be bigger and better than ever, Jack. So, well, about 2 weeks ago, I finally picked up enough cans to purchase a copy of the Mississippi Encyclopedia. Doc, I may be down in my back lifting it up here in a minute, so I might need your help. But about, I don't know, I think 15 years ago, Doc, I had a midlife crisis. Some of you might have had one of those before, I don't know. But I was going to do some wild and crazy things, which I have done some wild and crazy things in my life, Jane. But instead of doing all those wild and crazy things that I thought about, I enrolled in the master's degree program at the University of Mississippi to get an MA in Southern Studies. And I'll tell you, that ensuing 5 years was about as much fun as I've ever had in my life. Now, because I've been a member of the House of Representatives for so many years, I was accused of being given that degree, Piggy. Well, that's an absolute abomination and lie, believe you me. These two guys right here worked me to the bone. And I had a lot of good help from Dr. Glenda Seegers, the librarian at Lee-Itawamba Community College. I don't think I ever told y'all that, but she helped me with a good bit of my research. Man's got to find help where he finds help. I wanted to know, as academically as possible, why I was so proud to be a Southerner. And I think I achieved that goal by working under Dr. Charles Reagan and Ted at the Center for the Study of Southern Culture at the University of Mississippi. I've only perused this book. I dare say before I cross the chilling waters of Jordan that I'll never read it cover to cover. But it's an encyclopedia. So you reference this thing from time to time. When you want to know something about Mississippi, you can come to this book, Francis and Dan, and you will find everything that you ever wanted to know about the state of Mississippi. Jimmy, I don't know you that well. I read about you. I know you're a good guy, but I know these other two guys, and I really like them. So, the authors, come forward, present.
Thanks, Steve. Just to clarify, the 5 years in the MA program, it's a 2-year program, but that's but I just we try to tell the truth. What we're going to do is take maybe 20 minutes and talk about the Mississippi Encyclopedia, the purposes of it, the process of putting it together, process of bringing it to a close, and prospects for the future even, and then we'll have plenty of time if you have some questions. We found sometimes it's almost too big a book for people to ask questions about, but thanks to the Lee County Library and Friends of the Library, and thanks to Reed's, to Susan, to Jack Reed, thanks to everybody for having us here. We've been traveling all over the state and beyond, and it's been exciting, been interesting. The level of interest has been high everywhere we go, which is nice to see. Let me answer a few questions that people want to know and sometimes are a little too polite to ask. How long did it take is the question that's embarrassing. We found my colleague Jimmy Thomas is the editor of our newsletter, the Southern Register, and we found a story in the Southern Register in 2003 that said work began. It said we expect to be finished at about 2007. Hey, Bruce. And I've been reading my own. I'm the successor to Charles Reagan Wilson as the director of the Center for the Study of Southern Culture. And I've been reading my director's columns for some reason in our newsletter, and found that starting in 2008, I'd been promising for it to be finished just any time now. So it's but as Steve Holland said, it's big. It's almost 9 pounds. My mother said it is ever so slightly heavier than I was at birth. It's 1,500 or so pages, about 1,400 entries. It has about 650 contributors, different authors. A big process to keep up with people, to keep up with authors, to organize, to synthesize, to check, to edit, copy edit, proofread. That's part of why we're so pleased to have it out. There are questions that other questions people want to know. Is it a celebration of the state of Mississippi? Is it a critique of the state of Mississippi? And what we've tended to say is it studies celebrations, and it studies critiques, and it studies defenses. So it's something to, the celebration comes from understanding all stories as part of the same story, not from a sense of defensiveness. As Steve said, it's a work of scholars, and its goal is to be inclusive of the famous topics, the iconic topics, the obscure topics. Our goal is to surprise people, to do a thorough job on the topics that we know people have to study when we study Mississippi. We come to Tupelo, and, well, you have a really good Elvis Presley entry. Yeah, we've got a really good Elvis Presley entry, but we've got entries on people that are not famous and never changed the world and are equally worth knowing about. There's every county has an entry. Every governor has an entry. We hope that this relationship between, and we kind of like it that most of the entries are about the same length. That means that governors and musicians and quilters and activists, their stories are about the same length. So it's not like people in power and people who are famous get a long time and then the rest of us get a paragraph. They're pretty much evened out. Over the months, a number of people have asked, and then I'll turn the microphone to my colleague Charles Reagan Wilson and Jimmy Thomas. People ask about the cover, and the cover was actually important to us. And if you look at the cover, it's not immediately obvious why that would be the cover, and that was kind of the point. The University Press of Mississippi, which sends regards, they've never done a book this large. And we were in an event at the Mississippi Book Festival this past Saturday and heard that their 250-page index was the longest index that they had ever done and ever imagined and ever seen. But the University Press of Mississippi wanted a cover that is colorful and that would stand out and be unique and that would make people want to pull it off the shelf and look at it. We wanted a cover that was surprising, that is surprising. We didn't want a cover that said that started with the questions that indicated what the questions might be. So we didn't want to cover with political divisions or with the 5 or 6 regions of Mississippi or with soil types or with obvious problems or with obvious heroes or heroines. Or this cover comes from a work of glass art that Roger Sturdivant, that you have some here that's exciting to see, and the colors don't conform to anything, and so they're not regions, they're not issues. So for me that means this is an encyclopedia where you don't know exactly what you're going to get when you open it up, and that's to me that's an exciting thing. This was my first encyclopedia. This is not Charles Reagan Wilson's first encyclopedia, and so I'll ask you to talk about the relationship between this and other encyclopedias. Jimmy Thomas is the associate director for publications at the Center for the Study of Southern Culture, and we found as we travel, a number of people wonder how you do a book like this and what's the process. Jimmy is the finisher of this book. Jimmy brought this book to completion, so I'm hoping we can talk about that some as well. But thank you again for being here, and I look forward to hearing questions, and we'll answer most of them successfully, I promise. But Charles.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for coming, and thanks to everyone here. I see a lot of friendly faces and friends I've known a long time. Thanks to Steve Holland for that nice introduction. It was an experience working with him on his master's degree. His schedule was just so crazy, of course, and so working around that. But he was an earnest, hardworking student, and always livened things up with a good quote or so. So he was fun to work with. And so Ted mentioned that I'd worked on the Encyclopedia of Southern Culture. That's why I came to Ole Miss in 1981. It's to work on that with Bill Ferris and Ann Abity and Sue Hart, who some of you know those folks. And so we published the encyclopedia in 1989, and so that's where I learned about doing encyclopedias. And it's a real lesson in human nature. You're working with hundreds of people, and it's a challenge to find out who's the best person to write this article and then write them. And in those days, of course, it was old-fashioned. There was no email. So we did it the old-fashioned way, writing letters and asking people to do things. And then they agreed to do them, and we'd do the follow-up, and all of this. And we did have a computer. Everything, it was a giant computer in those days, I think a K-Pro maybe or something like that. We called it Bubba. It was so big, it was just like dominating the room. So we put the articles on there, but we corresponded with people by the old-fashioned way. And so they would say they're going to do them. Sometimes they did. Sometimes they were right on schedule, but often not. So you kept doing follow-ups. So I remember there's this one guy. He was a librarian. The reason I thought of this today, coming to the library, at the University of Louisville. And he was going to do an article on Louisville, Kentucky. And I sent him one final reminder, and he called me and said, "Charles, I'm sorry. I want to do this. I just have been busy." So he said, "I'm going to write you a letter every day until I finish the article." And so he did. So I'd get this little handwritten note saying, "Worked hard on the article today, more tomorrow." Then the next day, "More progress today." Then the third day, "Hard day with endless meetings. I'm sitting by the fireplace with a glass of wine, but I promise to work on the article tomorrow." And then after a week, he did the article, and I had the article, and I lost my pen pal. But nonetheless, that's how it works, just kind of continual reminders and updating and all of this. So did the Encyclopedia of Southern Culture in 1989. Happy to have that done. Went on to teach at Ole Miss. And then Sitha Srinivasan, who was the director of the University Press of Mississippi in 2003, was it? Yes, 2003.
She came earlier.
She came earlier. She came earlier to the university, and she came to see us at the center and asked us to do a Mississippi Encyclopedia. So I didn't tell her, but my first thought was, "You've got to be kidding." Because I knew what it takes to do an encyclopedia on this scale and the hundreds of people you have to work with and all the technical issues and everything else. But our chancellor was in favor of it, and it was a good thing for us to do. Other southern states and states across the country were doing state encyclopedias. And so Mississippi needed to have one, and we were a logical person because of our experience to do it. So we did. So it's been a wonderful project. Those of us who are on the project write a lot of articles because sometimes you can't find people to do things necessarily. Some of my favorites, one of my favorites was the article, and when you're one of the editors, you have the privilege of doing things you want. I wrote the Dizzy Dean article. So naturally, and I enjoyed reading and Dizzy's wonderful use of language. There was the time with librarians were always after him for his grammatical misuses, and he told one of them they complained about his using ain't all the time, and he finally got exasperated and said, "Well, some people who don't use ain't got jobs." And I wrote what may have been the last article in the encyclopedia. Ted and I were winding down, and somebody may have been supposed to do the article on trees and didn't do it or whatever, but we wanted to include that because we have a lot of similar kind of articles on flora and fauna and this kind of thing. So trees. Okay, so I know how to do research. So I go to the library and I get the books down from the shelf and I research about trees in Mississippi, and there's wonderful books on this. And so boiling it down and adding cultural references, and one of Eudora Welty's stories ends very dramatically with a chinaberry tree falling on a character and kills the character. That's a very dramatic use of the tree. So anyway, I finished the article. I'm proud of myself. Last one. We're almost finished, whatever. Give it to Ted. And then I realized that night I forgot to include the magnolia tree. Now, in my defense, there's a separate entry on the magnolia tree. But nonetheless, I realized somebody looking up trees will say, "This guy didn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't even know the magnolia tree is the state tree of Mississippi." So it's been fun working on this book. It's different from the Encyclopedia of Southern Culture and the new encyclopedia because of the state focus. And so you can burrow down into a real depth. You have the scope also of everything from Civil War generals, civil rights activists, to all the religious denominations we could think of to document, to iconic restaurants like Lusco's in Greenwood and Doe's in Greenville, and athletes like Dizzy Dean. Mississippi is an incredibly creative state, and so, and I'm interested in that personally, the creativity. And so we had lots of cultural people who were cultural, great cultural expression. Of course, our blues performers and our writers and our gospel singers and our artists and all of this. But there are surprising things. Like one of the articles that I particularly liked, because it was something that I don't think people knew about. It's an individual named Milton Babbitt. Anybody ever heard of Milton Babbitt? Most Mississippians or anybody else would not have. He was a famous music composer from Jackson. He won a Pulitzer Prize for his life's work as a composer. He was a leader in electronic music in the world from Mississippi. And so we highlight people like that with news stories. And he didn't live a lot of his life after he was an adult in Mississippi, but he always came back and he always loved Mississippi. And he insisted on his liner notes. They always say he was educated in the public schools of Jackson, Mississippi. So here's a new figure that I discovered, even though I've always studied a lot about Mississippi and the South. So we tried to highlight people like that and give new people and new themes and new ideas. So it was a great pleasure to work with these gentlemen and lots of other contributors. So I'm going to introduce Jimmy now. Jimmy worked with me as the managing editor of the New Encyclopedia of Southern Culture, the 24-volume paperback book we did that overlapped actually with preparation of the Mississippi Encyclopedia. So the center was a busy place the last decade and a half or so. And after we finished the New Encyclopedia, Jimmy came and, as Ted said, was really the person who helped us close out and finish, actually get it done, the published version. So Jimmy Thomas.
Well, I too want to thank everybody for having us today. I've never been in this library, and it looks a lot like the library I grew up in Greenville. I'm from the Mississippi Delta. So this book means a lot to me. Before I tell you what I did, I was thinking on the way up here, some of my favorite entries in this book are what we do naturally when you pick up a book like this. You look for things you are aware of. So I look up things having to do with Washington County. Leland was where I grew up much of my life and then moved to Greenville. But think about the 1927 flood, or James' son Thomas, who's also from Leland, and things like that. And when you do that, when you pick this book up and you look up Tupelo, and we'll find Tupelo in here a great deal, you start to find other things, entries on tongue nuts, and real surprises. And that's where it gets kind of fun. That's where it continues to be fun when you peruse a book like this. I came to the Center for the Study of Southern Culture in 2003 to work with Charles and Ann Abity, who many of you probably know, to work on the New Encyclopedia of Southern Culture. Like Charles said, it was a 24-volume encyclopedia. We staggered the production of those so it wasn't all at one time. But that project wrapped up around 2012. The work wrapped up about 2012, and the final volume was published in 2013. Before that, there was one of our associate editors, Odie Lindsay, who was a master's student at the center, like Steve and myself, worked with Ted and Charles as the associate editor, but as also a managing editor, someone who would stay in touch with all of those contributors. And then those entries would come in, and this is essentially what I was doing with the New Encyclopedia of Southern Culture. But those entries would come in, then you would edit them, you'd get them on their desk, and then they would make changes, and then I would go to Charles and say, what does this say? I can't read your handwriting. And he would look at it, and he'd think about it for a little bit, and then he'd tell me. But that project wrapped up, and we had a lot of fun. That was a South-wide project, where Mississippi is obviously included in a lot of that. But when that project wrapped up, Odie left, and he teaches now at Vanderbilt. I came to start working on this project. And so essentially what I was doing with it is some of the not-so-sexy things like getting in touch with contributors and getting them to sign contracts to say, yes, it's okay that you use our words, my words, and to find images to illustrate the book. Now, Ted had done a lot of that work with some of our great institutions in the state. The Mississippi Department of Archives and History was really helpful. The University of Mississippi's J.D. Williams Library, the Department of Special Collections and Archives was particularly helpful. But then there are a lot of things that you just can't find images of, but you kind of need them. So one of the fun things for me working on this book was to, as I traveled across the state, whether for pleasure or for business, I would take my camera with me. And so after having worked with this book for so long, every once in a while I would make U-turns in the middle of a street because I saw something that I could photograph that I knew that would work in this book. So being from the Mississippi Delta, a lot of those photographs come from there, but elsewhere across the state. So yeah, the book wrapped up in, we sent it to press, when was it? Golly, it's 2017. Yeah, it takes a long time. Once you send a book like this to press, they don't turn around and just print it. We had a copy editor who we worked with, and like Ted said, we had an indexer, and one indexer read this entire book and indexed it, which I was so happy that job was not mine. Because it's a lot of work getting to that point, but indexing, I don't know if anyone in this room has ever indexed just a regular book, but it's very tedious. So I was very grateful that we hired someone, the press hired someone to do that job, which is the last thing that you see when they send back page proofs for you to look at and correct. Send back, and then this book was actually, I think it was printed in China. So there was a ship, filled with just this book, and yeah. So we're very happy that it exists in the world. It's no longer just a concept, but it is a wonderful book, and all of us who are here, live in Mississippi, would have something to gain by perusing it, and I'm sure looking in the index for your favorite topic, you will find it. If you don't, I'll give you Ted's email address, and you can let us know if we missed something. All right, thank you, and I'll turn it back over to Ted.
We can all take. And we're happy to take questions. There will be an online version. That's not just entirely to ward off criticisms, but that helps. But the online version that the Mississippi Humanities Council is going to organize and working with Jimmy and the rest of us sometime in 2018, that'll help a lot with classroom use, I think. We're really happy that it's a book for a couple of reasons. It's pretty, that's one. It's an attractive thing. It's far more useful to thumb through than thumbing through online. The surprise, the part of the component of it's A to Z organized. With Zig Ziglar at the very end, and I think there are a lot of things that no one would ever think to look up, but you will find it like tongue nuts was a good example that, and it's symbolically important too that the idea that all Mississippian stories are all that we can do are within the same covers. That's different from having just a lot of individual entries floating around on the internet. One thing I like to do, and then happy to take questions, and Charles will answer most of them, is if somebody would yell out a just random 3-digit number. It's part of Dr. Bruce Ingram is a former PhD student from many years ago. Bruce, tell me a 3-digit number.
386.
Okay, this has worked every single time, and if it doesn't work today, thank you, Bruce. And just to show the range of what you find on 384.5, religious leader William Henry Elder, the Elizabeth Female Academy surveyor Andrew Ellicott, there aren't a lot of surveyors in this book, but Judge Powhatan Ellis, artist Thomas Edward Ellaby Jr., musician Ruby Elsie, and then long entry on emancipation. And the goal there is just to say, yeah, as Jimmy said, you go looking for something and you find 5 other things that are at least as interesting. Thank you very much, and we're happy to answer questions, but big or small. Jack.
Some of the great parts of living here are storytellers. When I was in law school, there was a guy that just, in the Delta, Jimmy, just, he couldn't talk without telling great stories. Steve Hall's a great storyteller. If one was interested in learning about some other storytellers, either these books they've written or any stories they might have told, how would one find those in the encyclopedia?
Well, there are individuals like Jerry Clower, of course, who is the classic, but we have articles on folklore and others, and so those would probably be the beginning point, I think, is the articles on folklore. And I don't know that we have a separate article on storytelling, but there's articles on literature and fiction that talk about the importance. You know, it's I think so many of our great writers drew from that storytelling tradition, and converted those stories into their fiction. I remember I asked Eudora Welty one time why there were so many great Mississippi writers. She said, "Honey, there wasn't anything else to do."
One of the other great things about this book as a resource is that at the end of every entry, so we talk about the entry on folklore, end of every entry, there's for further reading, essentially, bibliography. So that would be helpful too, to lead us to other books that you would find, say, in this library.
Yeah, it raises also one of the limitations of an encyclopedia is that when all your entries are 750 to 1,500 words, the people who you most want to hear saying, "Well, that reminds me of a story." It doesn't have that story, so it kind of says they're storytellers but doesn't include it. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the indexing and alphabetical order. Is it also historically correct? Go all the way back and come.
How far does it go back?
It goes back as long as scholars can go back. That's a good question. That it doesn't just go back to 1817. No, there are woolly mammoths here and dinosaurs and archaeological ages, archaeological periods. It's part of what I had to confront of my own ignorance was I don't know how to read archaeologists. Where several 100-year period they would talk about what they knew about the native people through physical through their work. So there's a lot of work on Native Americans. There's a lot of work on environment. So so it doesn't just start with statehood. But I think I suspect it does. I suspect the 20th century is its most successful century, but it's a good effort to go back a long way, and go back a long way before there was a political unit called Mississippi. Yes.
I think that deciding on what to include might be difficult, but I think what is more difficult, can you remember anything you decided you were not going to include?
I do. The process of deciding what to include that we forgot to talk about it. We used the model from the Encyclopedia of Southern Culture, where we had about 30 different scholars on different topics giving us lists, and that's how. So it wasn't me and Charles and Jimmy and Ann Abity saying, "Oh, this is what's important," but it was a whole lot of different people with the lists of agriculture, archaeology, art, civil rights, Civil War, drama, education, environment, and all the way, and about 30 of those. We made the decision not to include an entry an entry just on somebody who was famous for being a murderer, that there are famous murderers, and we said they'll be in here in some other topics, but that we're not going to give them a topic that's sitting next to other topics, that they're only famous for that. We faced the question of what to do with people who were born in Mississippi and left at very young ages. And I don't know that we had a successful criterion, but the working criteria was if somebody left at age 2 or age 5 and their work and their life still had to do with Mississippi themes, yes, they're in here. If they left and best we can tell never mentioned it again, then they're left out. And I have some unusual musical interests, and I really wanted a disco artist in the Mississippi Encyclopedia. And darn it all, the best example moved away at age 2 and never. If she looked back, she never told anybody about it. But that's a start. There are a few mistakes of people who need to be in here that we've just failed to include, and people have been telling us, and we've been noticing too. But those are two ways of trying to cut it down. Yes, sir.
I'm sure it's overboard how wonderful we are rather than our pay.
It's yeah. A lot of people, when they talk about Mississippi, they do a lot of this. There's the good and the bad, and what I try to do is something like that. Let's see how things are intertwined, but there's a lot of problem solvers in this book, and a lot of people fixing things rather than just emphasizing the problems. But, yes, I mean, but you gotta mention the problems for the problem solvers to be important. But
follow up on her question.
yes, sir.
Reminds me of a novelist from Macon, Mississippi, Ben Ames Williams. He left at age about 20 or 21, went to Maine, and he wrote all of his novels and hardly ever came back to Mississippi. So his famous novel, probably everyone knows, Leave Her to Heaven.
Right.
Is he recognized?
I think he's mentioned, but he doesn't have an entry. That's which is kind of bridging the gap between. Yeah, it's an. Yeah, that's and there are quite a number of people, and I was at the Mississippians in Georgia Society picnic. There are a lot of them, and a man came over and whatever he was doing, there wasn't a lot going on there, and noticed that there wasn't a lot going on in our tent either, and I was talking a long time, and I recognized who he was, and I was wanting to go look, and if he could just turn away, I could look, and I found, yes, he's in the index, and I wanted to be able to tell it, but there are a lot of people who are mentioned as examples of larger things that there's not a 500 or 750 word entry on, but yes, Steve.
I just happened to open this thing up at about 6:30 this morning, and I turned to page 726, which is your entry on Lee County.
Uh-oh.
Of course, it's passionate to me. And the facts are pretty staggering. I thought I knew a lot about Lee County, but I learned a lot with this.
Good.
I went to other counties, and I observed that your staff, you guys, did, it looks like all 82 of the counties, you didn't farm that out.
Correct.
I mean, like, hey, guys, we had exactly 75 immigrants in the 1900 census, and they were all Irish. Fun facts to know the tale about these three guys. What was the deal on that? That's just interesting. I don't know.
Yeah, that's true, and I appreciate that. Generally, when somebody says, I was looking at a particular page, there's trouble coming. So thank you. No, the county entries, we decided, we worried about it a long time. We decided to do them in-house just so we could ask the same questions of each county. So we had a series of questions of timing and population and labor and relationship to Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement and contemporary ethnicity and economics, religion, a lot of things we could take from the census. And I tend to think that each individual county, people look at it and say, that's okay, and that's not bad. But it is. I hope it's more useful even that when you do what Steve, what you said, when you start comparing them to other counties and where you can see, oh my goodness, this is real. Things are moving in different directions, and where the population is increasing here and it's declining there, and the economies are changing here and it's changing a completely different way there, and that's what I'm hoping will happen, and I think so. We did have we were worried that using a lot of census means using a lot of numbers, and using a lot of numbers for a lot of us, that means it's going to be a little boring. So we had a number of people kind of sweep through and try to liven them up with individual details. Yes.
Did people volunteer to help, or did you use the university stuff?
We used again based on the model that Charles and Bill Ferris used and Ebony in the Encyclopedia, the Encyclopedia of Southern Culture, which we have for years called the Encyclopedia, but now it's the I call it the old Encyclopedia, but no. The goal was to be collaborative. We had a particular goal of using all the expertise in the state, and so all the universities and colleges and libraries and experts in the state. In the early years, we were spending a lot of time looking up things online, what people's specialties are, and ultimately, I think I counted in a boring day one time, I counted that there are contributors from 33 states and about 12 countries, because we found experts in all over. One of the experts in Choctaw language taught at the University of Alaska. One of the experts on the blues teaches in Geneva, Italy. A lot of interest in Australia and Mississippi. And so the goal was to find people who were working on these topics. Toward the end, when we didn't want to wait, and toward the end we assigned our students to do things, and our graduate students to do things, and Jimmy and Charles and Ann and Odie Lindsay and I wrote a lot of things, some of which trees, some of which we're not all that qualified. That's not our specialties, but it's there are about 100 of the 650 authors, about 150 are students or alumni of the University of Mississippi. Yes.
The gentleman that you mentioned, Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
from Jackson,
Milton Babbitt.
musician, very obscure. How did you find out about that person in the first place?
One of our consultants, I assume, suggested it. We had someone who suggested music topics, and so for somebody, and this is a good example of how we would never have known that, but somebody who studies music, they're going to have a wider net. They're going to know all these different fields, and somebody obscure like that turns out is important. He's the world-renowned authority and Pulitzer Prize winner, and so having a scholar in music is what helps us know somebody important like that.
I realized at one point that the easiest way to make sure that you have an entry is either to be the governor or to play the guitar. And I don't think we have guitar playing governors. I bet.
No, not that I know of.
Do you know? Do we have any governors who played the guitar? I don't.
Well, I don't think any of them were ever qualified to do that.
Yeah.
How many first edition copies are there?
I think the press said 8,000. I don't know how many of those are gone.
No.
Hadn't heard.
Hadn't heard yet. One of the things we're really trying to do, we want to make a concerted effort to make sure that this book is in every public library in the state. It's a great resource for not only for us, but for grade school children doing research papers. You can buy this book, or you can buy a stack of books. And quite honestly, you will get as much information here as you would in kind of a random selection of books. So that's really one thing we really hope, is that these books will get into libraries, whether public or university libraries.
What about school libraries?
School libraries.
High school.
That would be wonderful. So, and I say that because that will help with getting to that, reaching that the end of that first print run of 8,000. But yeah, I think to me, that's really important. A book like this is a great resource for kids learning about our state and learning history. I'm finding that history isn't taught as much in elementary schools. I've got a sixth grade daughter, so this book is increasingly important, to me at least.
In line with history, we happen to know that our area was settled because the Indians found a lot of good water. Are Indians mentioned in this?
Absolutely.
Back to that culture?
Yeah, no, and a lot of entries dealing with the two major continuing groups, the Chickasaw and the Choctaw. There's a lot of entries that are both historical and contemporary, and then there are a lot of entries on earlier groups that are more or less extinct, or more or less, but no, there's it's that is not my area of expertise, and so I had to learn a lot, but I think it's pretty well done. Yes, sir.
In retrospect, is there anything that you wish you had covered that did not get covered, or not get covered as well as you, in retrospect, think it should?
That's hard to know, really. I think that's where people have to tell us. Because, they're, having all these fields that are covered and having these scholars who advised us on all this, we tried to have a wide net, and there weren't any areas we left out, intentionally, that we didn't think should be covered somehow. We have a lot, because we're from a Institute for Southern Studies, Southern culture. We're very oriented toward culture, and so we probably have more on creative people, writers and musicians and artists and others than some encyclopedias might have. So we went out of our way to make sure those were covered, but it's not like we were sort of excluding any major area. We keep thinking about people that we considered and didn't include. But the thing is, it's so long, and it's hard to have everything in there, and how many blues singers do you have, And so, and things you need to cover thoroughly, like the governors. We have every governor, but you can't have all the politicians in the state necessarily, And so, in all Mississippi history. So there are judgments that you have to make, but they're informed judgments, by what scholars think in other fields and all of this. So.
We found that it's very easy to do what I'm about to do. There are important topics in Mississippi that national and international scholars have not studied so well, that when people think about Mississippi, they want to study even certain places and certain questions. And so actually the history of Mississippi industry, we had to go out and work hard to get what we got, and probably there's some better, there are forms of Mississippi industry that we could and should do more thoroughly, and that's not out of lack of trying, but out of the fact that nationally historians, when they want to study Southern industry, they don't focus on this. People want to study Southern economy, they study agriculture, or they study trees, we learned a number of things. That we had a friend who kept sending us medical history entries, and after a while realized, boy, we should have an entire series, and he became our medicine associate, our advisor for medical topics, and and somebody else, and this was kind of interesting with a legislator in the room. Somebody noticed that we had a series of entries called politics, and which we thought covered politics and government, but a scholar at Mississippi State said, that's different. Politics and government, those aren't necessarily the same things. And so we added a section called of entries called government, and that came just through the process, not our wisdom. But
You wrote about trees, did you write about birds?
We have birds in there, but I didn't write it. I didn't have that privilege of writing about birds.
some of the environment entries are some of my favorite things.
Yeah.
Mississippi sandhill crane is just lovely. Woodpeckers are things that you can learn about. Yeah, through the amphibians, through the trees, through the birds. Yeah.
Somebody asked us at one place, were there frogs in there?
Gopher.
Frogs. And so there's not a separate entry on frogs, but they're covered extensively in the amphibians section.
Yeah.
So.
I've been researching some Pontotoc County history in honor of our bicentennial coming up for the state. And I've been looking for a source of information, something written about the meteor shower of 1833 by someone in Mississippi, because we know it fell, if you're familiar with this, it fell on Mississippi and all across the southeast and a lot of the rest of the United States, and I cannot find a thing. I know there were people here writing at that time, but is that in there? Any chance?
We'd have to look, but no, I'm not.
Obscure,
Yes,
know.
no, okay. The true answer frequently is it's not, but it ought to be, but I don't think so.
Have you been able to uncover any newspapers that were published?
Like from Richmond, Virginia. I haven't found anything in Mississippi.
Nothing from the county. I guess 1833. I don't know what newspapers would have been in existence then.
I'm still working on it.
That sounds like a fun research project.
It's a great project.
After seeing the eclipse,
Right.
we're looking at the sky now.
But we'll be in touch for the online version. We may have taken enough of your time, and we appreciate it. Yes,
Steve, one last question.
I want you guys to tell this audience a little bit about the history of the Center for the Southern Culture at Ole Miss, what you guys do and how you have been an important cog in the history and the selling of the state of Mississippi.
Well, I'll start and then you add.
Okay.
So the center was established in 1977, and it came out of the idea of two faculty members on campus who suggested the logic of doing the study of the South in Mississippi, and the resources both in the library, faculty, student interest, where we are. We do a lot of documentary projects, send students out to document people in communities and all of this. So we started in 1977. Bill Ferris came in 1980, I believe, as the founding director, and Ann Abity was there from the beginning as associate director. I came in 81, and we have an academic program. We give a bachelor's degree in Southern Studies and have, I don't know how many majors we have now, but 50, 30.
25, 30, yeah.
And then we have a graduate program, master's program. And so the academic program is kind of the foundation of what we do, but we do a lot of outreach activities of the Southern Foodways Alliance, and Ted can tell you some of the developments on outreach and other documentary projects and other things.
Yeah, it's always intertwined between teaching and other things, trying to take academic work like this does and make it influenced by and available to people beyond academic audiences. But the Living Blues magazine came in 1983 or 4. Southern Foodways Alliance started with a student in Southern Studies in the late 90s who said, "What can I see and show and understand through thinking about food and culture?" And now they have about 1,200 members, and to be honest, the best fundraisers at the university outside of football. We do lots and lots of documentary work. It's turned out that I think we all know this. But it's turned out that everybody all college students come in thinking they're kind of a photographer or kind of a filmmaker, because we can be documentarians just immediately and simply, and so we started teaching how to do documentary film and photography and audio, and students said, I'd like to do that a little more on my master's thesis. So first we had a documentary track for the master's students, and now starting just this year we have a new Master of Fine Arts in Documentary Work through Southern Studies. It's one of the unique things at the university, and it's kind of ever changing and kind of creative that way. And it's I always thought I'd get a job when I was becoming a historian. Thought I'd get a job at a little school and teach the same lectures year after year, and that would be fine. It's way more interesting. Sometimes I think that other life would have had a lot more sleep, but that's but. Oxford Conference for the book. Jimmy is the director. The Faulkner Conference started in the 1970s, longest running single author event. Yeah, that's primarily now the English department. We do a lot of outreach to the food waste conferences, other conferences, conference on the future of the South, trying to think of not just historically. And Jamie Joyner's been on their board for 20 years or so, and thank you. Yes, he's at the University of North Carolina, the professor of history there, and doing fine.
We saw him this week in Jackson at the at the Mississippi Book Festival. He had an exhibit. He's got a new book out that's called The South in Color, and Bill made his fame in photography as a black and white documentary photography, going all the way back to where he grew up in Vicksburg on the family farm, and he started taking photographs and making films. But he had these color photographs he'd been working on and taking all along, but they were just kind of personal photographs, and he never published any of them, never had a gallery exhibit. And so our friend of all of us, Tom Rankin, convinced him that this was something he needed to make more use of. And so there's a book called The South in Color, Photographs by Bill Ferris, which is a wonderful new contribution. And again, Bill is back in Mississippi a lot. He's a native, and he was 18 years director of the center at Oxford before me and then Ted. So we've had 3 directors over the 40-year history of the center. So there's been a lot of stability, thankfully. And but Bill is doing well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll close by answering Steve's question in another way. Southern Studies is a unique thing to say you're going to get a degree in, and so I always say that Southern Studies students it just self-selects a unique bunch of people who are willing to go through life explaining their degree. But we're historians, and we go to Bruce Ingram came, and we know that everybody there is going to be a historian. Every year after year, we don't know what our Southern Studies students are after, and that's an interesting adventure, and a lot of them. Whole lot of them kind of helped change this book and to improve this book. But thank you very much. We appreciate it. And I think thank you. I should have. Thanks for having us. We'd love to. Yeah.
Hey Jimmy, I'm Ken Lippincott. My sister Nancy Ashley.
The best story on this was by Scott Morris. That he did a really thorough, came over as a Saturday feature, but then it got picked up by one of our services, and people all over have been telling me, did you see that story in Jackson paper?
Okay. I gotta take a peek.
Yes. I remember.
Oh, pictures. Oh, This is,
Because part of what I remember was people were apologizing.
What are you looking up?
I just wanted to see what it looked like rather than just pay like a want ads, you know?
Good job.
Yeah. Oh, I just wanted to be sure you made us look good instead of all the people that take advantage of our past, which I am sick of.
There's